Hello, folks. Yes, welcome to the Youth League. My name is Farai Movuti, and I am the current Youth League chairman of ZANU-PF Youth League UK. And it is my honor today to be having a conversation with a man I admire deeply and a man who has shaped my political thoughts, be it in geopolitics, Professor George Shire tonight. As we await, he's currently speaking to our technical producer, who is Cormid Taku, as we are currently underway to ensure that he gets on the platform. Hold on, I'm actually getting an in call from them right now, so I should relog in. If you give me 2 minutes. Okay, sorry, I just had to quickly address my technical advisor and Professor George Shire as they log on to the live. So we are going to, they should be coming up live right now. Anyway, Chido, how are you doing? I know that you're in Zimbabwe right now. I hope you're enjoying the sun, and we're looking forward to have you back in the UK anytime soon. And so tonight the conversation is going to be rallying around geopolitics. The first conversation we had, the last interview that we had, besides the one that we had to cancel as a consequence of an emergency that happened at HQ, was around the issues pertaining to the sanctions. But tonight we have a slightly different conversation. This will particularly interest those who are living in the UK. Professor George Shire is a cultural critic, a decolonial thinker, post-colonial critic equally, and a professor in cultural studies. And his attention for me is in his wit and his understanding of geopolitics, and that's what we will be talking about tonight. So he's just logged in, so I'm just going to add him into the conversation. Okay, I can't seem to add him. Comrade Taku, my technical advisor, if you could quickly work on that. The add button doesn't seem to be adding him. So I'm not sure if it's on my side, but I'll quickly try that again. It would be the case if you're still on a conference call. So you might need to drop the conference call and allow him to then add himself to the group. Okay. Yeah, but I do see that Professor George is watching. So he's on the platform. So stage one. Apologies, folks. We try to start on time all the time. But just right now, we're just dealing with technical issues. But we will be sorted in no time. Okay, so all we need to do is add. Okay. Professor, can you hear me? If you can, just type in the box that you can hear me clearly, and we'll try and add you again. Okay. And Taku, if you can hear me, do type in the box as well. Okay. Right. In the meantime, if any of our guests have any questions, okay, I can see you, comrade. Right, I can see you, Professor. I'm gonna try and add you. Your phone doesn't seem to be having the add button, Prof. And that's gonna be a problem. I don't know if you can see the add button on your side, Prof. But there are other ways to do it. Worst case scenario, Prof, I'll simply call you on your FaceTime and have you. And I'll have the interview on my other phone. So we'll try it again. Right, there's no add button there. Mary Ann Kirk, good to see you. Right. Prof, because I can't see an add button and for the purposes of time, I'll quickly add you on our FaceTime. So, Prof, I'm adding you.
I just accepted COVID.
Okay, so yeah. So I got the Prof here online. We just have to work with what we have to do. Make do with what we have. So, Prof. Now, can everyone hear the Prof clearly?
Can I just put my shit on?
It might be a good idea, Prof.
Sorry?
It would be a good idea if you could.
Sorry?
Can you not? Can you hear me clearly?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. So it's going to be very difficult to do it, but I think if can everyone hear Prof? If you can hear Prof, just put a thumbs up. We can hear him. Okay, great. So you can be heard, Prof. Shall we begin? Right. Okay. Now, Prof, I can see you with my reflection this side. This is just for the purposes for the audience.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay, great. Yeah, we had a bit of technical issues in the beginning, so for those who are just joining us, thank you for joining us and thank you for your patience. My name is Farai Muvuti, as I said before, and I'm the Youth League chairman of the ZANU-PF Youth League UK and Europe chapter. And tonight, here with me is a man I deeply admire, my mentor, and someone I've known for years, someone who my family and everyone I hold dear, heart in high regard. It is none other than Professor George Shire. Tonight we'll be speaking about the geopolitical impact of Brexit, as well as the new leadership contest within the Conservative Party. We want to explore how that can impact us as Africa at large and Zimbabwe predominantly. Good evening, Professor. How are you doing today?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly.
Okay. Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be asked to take part in your amazing discussions. I hope I'll be of some use.
Great, thank you, Professor. Well, Professor, let's delve straight into it. Well, just last week, as a Youth League media team, we hosted a conversation around the issue of sanctions and so forth. And I thought it would be a great way, a great segue as a program in its infancy to discuss the impact of Brexit on Zimbabwe. What would you say would be the impact of Brexit, if there is any?
Brexit is the best way of entering discussion about Brexit is this. Imagine you're married, and somebody in the partnership says they want a divorce, and then you say to them, "Okay, have one," and they say, "Hang on a minute, I still want to have all the benefits to do with being married." Well, it doesn't work like that, and that is the problem of the British. Having educated themselves to think that there is life outside of a regional institution, they find themselves in a mess, unable to make that real. That's their problem. And what that means is that Britain is trying to find a way of remaining on the international stage with some sort of muscle. And I doubt that is going to happen very much, partly because in the moment we are now in a very planetary sense, regional institutions matter. Okay, regional institution. The idea that regional institution matter to an extent they have to redefine what national institutions can or can't do. No one can live in isolation anymore. Doesn't matter what part of the planet might be. So in our case, it matters to be a member of SADC. And in Britain, it matters to be a member of the European Union. Now, the problem for Britain is this. Imagine taking the United Nations, for example. Everybody says we are all members of the United Nations. The United Nations doesn't work very well. And Zimbabwe has been arguing for the reform of the United States institutions, but nobody has said that we should get out of the United Nations.
Yes.
And that's different. That's the problem for Britain. Now, what that means for the region is that our histories have been interconnected. I call it sometimes a marriage of misalliance, okay? They've been interconnected. People would sometimes even wish that they were disconnected in the light of the madness, the nightmare of that marriage. I don't think that is possible, because much as it is a marriage of misalliance, it's interconnected to the extent that one can't exist without the other. So one can only hope for a partnership of some form. Okay. The of Zimbabwe, of the region, of the African continent, is its fate is interconnected to the fate of the European Union in that way. Okay? So the future for Zimbabwe in this conversation around Brexit has to be read through what the future relationship between Zimbabwe or SADC or the African continent and the European Union will be. Now, in that sense, the ball is on British court than ours. And I think Zimbabweans ought to just steady on. Because in a way, I argue, all the cards are in our hands. It doesn't mean you ignore what's going on in Britain. It just means that the pressure at this stage, as I see it, is on the British. Why? Because Britain wants to find a new role for itself, not just in its relationship with Zimbabwe, but in relationship to the African continent and indeed in the Commonwealth. I have argued previously that the last thing that Britain would like to see is a Commonwealth, for example, in which Zimbabwe is an outsider, partly because of the kind of, if you like, political, cultural capital we've got. So it's in Britain's interest to see Zimbabwe inside the Commonwealth and on side with it.
But from the recent statements that we've been seeing from the Commonwealth, the Foreign Office, when it comes to, say, our rejoining the Commonwealth, seem to be a hardline stance, sort of nostalgic of Blair's time. Is that merely politicking, or do you see that to merely be a meandering to the U.S. foreign policy?
I think my guess is that there's a lot of face savings activity that is going on behind the scenes. And I think what happened with where the British government is now, it inherited a situation which has not gone off yet. Okay, and I think most people in Britain, inside British politics, would say, I think Britain was mistaken to have driven this to the mountain without thinking on how to get down. Do you know what I mean? So that's where they're saying. So the pressure for us is to steady on. Okay, not to be drawn off course. Okay, it's not about changing our tune, but it's about tidying up at our inside household. So the pressure for me is not on us. The pressure is on Britain trying to find a way of doing.
So quickly looking at the statement you used, a marriage of what's the term?
Misalliance.
Yeah, marriage of misalliance. Okay, looking at that particular statement within the context of say the SADC region, do we have enough galvanized support within SADC? And one would equally question, does Africa speak in one voice in terms of looking at the EU as you've recommended?
Well, the thing is this: Zimbabwe's support within the region, within the African continent, within the global south, is steady. It has not wavered in any shape or form. Okay? So we have to turn it on its head and look at what we are in a moment in which we have nothing to lose as long as we don't mess up. Okay? So in that sense, it's not like we can make the United Kingdom or anybody else change their course. I think the position in Britain, I think the British position is going to implode from within, because they need Zimbabwe more in that geopolitical frame than we might need them. Yes? So that's what makes me say that. And the other point to make is that, you see, up to until now, Britain has been able to use the European Union as a way of driving its leverage on not just Zimbabwe, but the region as a whole. It does not have that muscle anymore. Okay? That doesn't mean we say it's all gone. It just means we remain as focused as we are. Right? There will be a number of people who play spoilers to that. Well, it's a dead end. There is no, Britain is not interested. The regime change agenda disappeared a long time ago, okay? In all honesty.
But some would argue that, yes, it may have disappeared within the spheres of the UK, considering their own political internal challenges. But UK equally realizes that its greatest geopolitical influence within the region alone would be its cousin, its connections to the US, for instance, who still retains its sense of aggression towards Zimbabwean foreign policy, as has been seen or evidenced by the renewal of the sanctions. Will that not then determine the same narrative we've seen in Britain over the last few decades?
The most important to think about is, think of it as a seismic change that is changing geopolitical foreign policy agendas, not just in relation to Zimbabwe, but the European Union in relation to the African continent and vis-a-vis to regional institutions in the region and elsewhere. So it's a seismic shift. And I understand why we've tended to look at in relation to Britain, because that colonial relation. But I think that is shifting too. And that is shifting in a very unpredictable way. Which is why I say the first thing to do is to ensure that our solidarities within regional institutions, first beginning in SADC from at home and going externally, are solid and steady on. Okay? Because we will not be able to remove or change the conversation about this relationship as a country to country. It can only happen in that kind of theater of the geopolitical. My hunch is our relationship with European Union is better than our relationship with Britain. Okay? So our chances of hearing a better hearing on the continent are better than in Britain. But then there is this other axis about Britain and United States. And the United States are Trump and Britain are a completely different story. And we need to think about this question in a slightly different way than we either do. And I'm impressed our foreign policy strategy is the right one to re-engage, but to re-engage on our terms, not re-engage because somebody's breathing down our neck. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's that sense, difficult it might look, that I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Now,
okay, sorry, go ahead.
So I come back to the Britain again. Instead of focusing on being preoccupied with Britain per se, we need to think in a geopolitical sense, in which, you see, the pressure on Britain about its future relationship with Europe is yet to come. That is the nightmare they are. And I think they would like to be in a position in which their relationship with Zimbabwe started out. The trouble is they painted themselves into a corner and are trying to get out. And I don't see any other way around other than finding an accommodation with the current Second Republic.
And okay, so that being said, we clearly are, if I can quickly go back to the SADC argument you make, the SADC region and the importance thereof. I think one of the questions that many have had is, what are the influences of these institutions, our regional institutions, including the AU, within a global geopolitical sense, and do those influences give us center ground in making arguments and leverage equally for us to speak from a national perspective and a continental perspective for the progression of what we may perceive to be issues that are critical to us?
Our situation in Zimbabwe, I think what Zimbabweans need to do, as Zimbabweans we need to do, is to think of our relationship with the rest of the world as a national question, not just a party political one. Okay? And it's in the national interest to ensure that we have good relationships with anyone. We're not at war with anyone. We're not threatening anyone. Okay? And so in that sense, I think the anti-sanctions campaign, an important one, will only have traction when it becomes a national question. And my challenge to people outside Zambia, for example, is to join into that argument about making sure that our relationship outside is a unified one. Of course, we will continue to have our own internal quarrels, but the idea to think we can ask somebody else to come and sort out, as we say in Shona, is a nightmare. It doesn't help us at all. So I think the important question for us as Zimbabweans is to identify what's in our national interest. And it's in our national interest to have good relationships with everyone. It is in that context we create conditions in which we create new friendships instead of creating antagonisms. So that's a conversation inside the country. Once we've done that, we'll be able to pull the rug under the argument that continues to isolate Zimbabwe. So it's not a question of having leverage. The leverage we have is about us becoming united as a people, right? And making that a national question. Now, people who call for sanctions, the sanctions are not going to bring miseries to the have-nots. Sanctions do not bring miseries to people in power. Sanctions do not make a difference to Blue Roof, for example. It just doesn't. And with the Zimbabweans, we should wise up that it's in our interest, especially for those who have nothing. And I don't care what political institutions they belong to, that those sanctions are offered back. So we make it a national question. And by making it a national question, we unite behind it. And with that muscle, we are then able to galvanize solidarities and alliance with everybody else on the planet to get those sanctions off our back. That's one thing. That's an internal question.
Okay, so since I think it's a perfect time to then straight go into the issues of sanctions, since you so perfectly brought them up. It seems to be, I believe like in the last two years, there was sort of like a collective consciousness regarding, the negative aspect of sanctions. But there appears to be a new resurgence of this debate yet again. And the argument is, well, listen, if the sanctions are there, why don't you do the reforms? Yeah, I mean, America has put its, what we may call it as people in England, red lines, as it were. But why don't we then make the necessary constitutional reforms that are meant to have been done in the last 6 years? Some would argue. How do we respond to that?
Sanctions are one of the so-called smart tools inside the neoliberal suitcase. Okay? Sanctions are used in order to bring people into line, someone else's interest. Anybody who thinks they've never worked for anyone, really think about it. They do not work. They only punish the poor globally. That's one thing. The second thing is, look at the history of them. When they began, yes, at the beginning of the 2000s, and now, they shift. Every week there's a new one. Okay? It could last us forever. Next time they'll say, continue having sanction until Fraimuvuti is the president. And it doesn't, do you know what I mean? It's not,
the goalposts will continue to be pushed. So would you agree then that even if our reformed agenda was endorsed by God himself, the sanctions saga will not change unless regime change occurs? Is that your argument?
Let's just do two things. The reform agenda is owned by Zimbabweans. Okay? It's not owned by anybody. Okay? It is not being done so that Mother Teresa can wake up a saint. Yes? It's for the benefit of Zimbabweans and Zimbabweans alone. Okay? And this idea that somebody else should become a self-appointed policeman about whether or not you and I are having dinner together is absurd. That's why I'm saying it has nothing to do with the reform agenda. The reform agenda is our own. We have a timetable to it. We will get there somehow. It's not the same thing as we will get there as long as we collectively as Zimbabweans have a will to put them into place. But the one thing that will undermine them is when somebody sort of like assumes that somehow the effect will be driven by what the United States does or what Britain does. It is absolute nonsense to think that way, because it has nothing to do. They couldn't give a damn. The United States couldn't give a damn if you and I were chopping each other's heads off. I'm sorry to put it that way. The neoliberal agenda of the West has nothing to do with the reforms that we as Zimbabweans would want to see in place, whatever they are. So we own the agenda for reforms. Okay, that's not somebody else's business. It's ours. We are open to telling people what reforms we were doing. People can have a look if they kind of want, but we ain't doing them because someone is holding the whip on our backs.
Okay, this is great. Now, okay, I suppose
what happens with the whips on our hands is that it ends up producing a resistance to those reforms.
Yes, wrapping up hardline sentiments from within, which then reverses the whole agenda. That is
right. If you come to my house.
Yeah, hello?
If you come to my house
and
you say, Mkoma George, I want to help you tidy up, I will say, by all means do, yes?
Mm-hmm.
But if you tell me, you're going to come and tell me how to tidy up, I'll tell you to go away. You know what I mean? There's a difference between assistance, yes, and intervention. The West has got this self-appointed idea that it can intervene in our bedrooms. I'm sorry, they can't. It's not on the agenda. The world requires us to cohabit, to live together, yes? And living together is not the same thing as being the gatekeeper. And as long as we see, we need to think about reforms as something to do with ourselves, tidying up our house, because we want to do so, not because the West tells us to do so.
Well, I suppose the critical question to quickly go into is, you raised the issue that sanctions need to be seen. There needs to be a clear dichotomy drawn between sanctions being a national issue and reforms being a localized issue that is time-framed and actioned by us, the Zimbabwean people. However, the problem that we have, which I'd like you to answer to, is that, well, we don't have that. This is what you're describing is at present quite utopian, purely because political players are saying, well, listen, the sanctions will go if reforms occur. Why is it that we have failed to make that distinction between an intervention and supporting the agenda of reform?
The first argument I made, it is a crucial one. We must not link the discussion about reforms with sanctions. That de-link them. They're not connected. Anybody who connects them is playing a silly game. Okay? Don't link them.
But that's what's happening.
Them. They are two separate conversations. Let me go back to reforms again. Okay? We do have, okay, an agenda, okay, as part and parcel of the current government to implement reforms. There has not been a refusal to do so. It will take time. It requires an agenda. It requires something. Of course, parliamentarians can quite rightly so ask for report back, review, and what's going on. That is in place. And anybody who says there's nothing is going on is whistling in the wind. It's for the birds. That's just not true factually. It might not be happening as fast as somebody else wants, but that's not the same as saying it's not happening. Full stop. Sanctions were never put into place because of some imagined reform. You know, they just went. They had they begin their life in relation to the land question and the fallout that emerges from that. One cannot disconnect them from the histories that produced them. They are connected to regime change. They occur in Zimbabwe and elsewhere
right.
on the planet.
Professor, just for the purposes of the audience, now this is a mantra, or rather a statement that, you know, well read, that we hear a lot, that sanctions are connected to regime change. For the purposes of my kind of audience, which happens to be young, what specifically can we evidence to be that for that to be the case?
Well,
specifically,
we have it on record. Both Britain, we have it on record for both Britain and United States arguing that they are working with opposition groups inside our country with the purpose of changing a government. That's regime change. Okay? We have evidence of both the United States and Britain working with opposition groupings and NGOs to create conditions in which you persuade people to negate their support for one part or another. That's regime change. We have evidence to show to create an economic nightmare in our country so that people can begin to rise up against their government. That's regime change. The agenda is there and explicit and clear. Right.
Which, if I can quickly interject with a question there, the question then becomes, now, if our government and our esteemed party knows this fully well, what are the sanction-busting mechanisms they've put in place to ensure that we safeguard the population from something that we deem clearly unjust? What are the things that we've put in place to ensure that we question the impact of the sanctions? Yeah, hello?
When you are under attack, the first thing one does is to defend your corner. Yes? And the Zimbabwean government and Zimbabwean people have a right to defend themselves because they are under attack. Zimbabwean people are not saying we're going to do a counter-attack. They're not extending to beat anybody up. They're not trying to have a war and impose economic sanctions on anyone. They're simply saying, get off our backs so that we can live our lives the way in which we want to live. And I think that's a principled position to maintain.
And I would agree that's a principled position to maintain. The question is...
And I think, and if I can add,
yeah,
it's an illusion to think, right, there is some other than that campaign to make sure they're removed. There is anything else you can do, right? The second thing we can do is to build solidarities, okay, with others, not just within the country, within the region, within the continent, within the globe, to get these sanctions off our backs. At the same time, build new kinds of relationships in which we can cohabit the planet like everybody else. And I have not seen anything that our government or anybody in the institutions that I'm close to is opposed to. This is people who play a spoiler game do not realize that that spoiler game will have them as the victims of it. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm arguing this is a national question, not just the government. Every Zimbabwean must have a purchase in this because it affects everybody, regardless of what political party you belong to. If there is no petrol tomorrow, there won't be any petrol tomorrow. If there is no cooking oil, there won't be any cooking oil tomorrow. If there is sour currency shortages, there won't be it for everybody. So anybody who thinks that sanctions only punish ZANU-PF, they are daydreaming. Okay? The reason we can't get out of this bottleneck economically because the flow of finance in our country is hindered by ZEDRA and the EU directives, full stop. So therefore they are the front line of our struggle, and as Zimbabweans we should challenge them.
Okay, so which then leads me to the original question. Brexit and the new Conservative leadership contest, does that aid that possibility, considering that Brexit further isolates UK and UK would need to further strengthen its Commonwealth network and would need Zimbabwe, as you said, political and cultural capital within the Commonwealth?
Well,
hello?
Yes. The problem for Britain is twofold. First, Britain has to find a new role for itself on the globe. The trouble is, it really doesn't know. Britain doesn't know where it's going. Okay, and until Britain knows where it's going, can one even begin to think about what its relationship with Zimbabwe or anybody else is going to be? It can't at the moment decide what its relationship with its next door neighbor is going to be, let alone Zimbabwe.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean it's not important, but we need to think about it that way. Okay. I think the chickens are coming home to roost for Britain than the rest of the world. Okay? Britain is going to have to find out not just how to climb out of the mess that has got itself in aka Brexit. It also has got to find a way of climbing down with its nastiness about Zimbabwe. So the problem is for Britain, not for Zimbabwe and the rest of the world. Now, you have to remember, when a dying cat is in its last throes, it has capacity to get nasty. That's where we are. So that's why I say, steady on. Let's get our ship in the right place. Let's not think, let's not imagine the future. Our future lies inside Britain. Our future lies being part of a regional institution, being part of the continent, being part of the global south, and being part of the planet in a completely different way from how historically we have been. And in many ways, we are on the door for that.
Okay, and I think just to stay on the geopolitical questioning line of questioning, we've recently seen India, we've recently seen tiger economies, we've recently seen China move closer and closer together in terms of the global south growing economically and increasing its intra-trading infrastructure and building. If the Belt project is anything to go by, that's being hosted by China, and we're seeing the sort of networks that India is also making in terms of market penetration and so forth within the economical global world, as it were. Now, what is Africa's role in this new world order that appears to be shifting away from the global heading towards the global south?
I have argued elsewhere that the precariousness of the African continent will become the major event of the 21st century. This is a continent in which every single neoliberal capitalist experiment is being tried. It will become the last frontier for it, okay, ecologically and economically. What that means is that we have to start thinking what the economic is for, okay, and not give the discipline of economics a free rein, okay. We need to think about that more seriously from the bottom up, and that's where we are. So the future, I see the future of the continent being driven by a slightly different impulse from the one, say, that was going on at the moment of national independence. Okay? Mm-hmm. I often argue that neoliberalism is the revenge to our independence. Now we've got our flag, the economy came to want us. So we're going to have to think about how to liberate ourselves economically. Not easy, but that's the challenge at the moment. It seems to me that's what the future for our country, for the region, for the continent looks like.
But are there any lessons to be drawn?
It's not just, if I finish, it's not just saying, let's go to India, or let's go to China, or let's go to Brazil. No, it's about, yes, go to those places too, but we need to think about what the economic is for, and the decolonizing our economies is the key, right? So it's not just well, I understand how the mantra "open for business" means. It was a way of responding to the onslaught. But people who think that metaphor is the end of the story haven't learned anything at all. We want one argument. We have to unleash, we have to think the world, our place on the planet, in a completely different way from what we've done up to now. Mm-hmm. And it's in that sense I end up being closer to the Bandung spirit, to the South spirit, than hitherto.
Okay, so I imagine that when you say decolonize our economies, now, could you go specifically into what that means? Does that necessarily mean building our own ecosystems, building our own modes of production in terms of a Fanonian sense?
What I mean is very simple. Let me just use South Africa as an example. South Africa is independent. It's celebrating its 25th anniversary since independence and so on. Everything is on the cards. But the economic is still very much underpinned by yesterday's racial story. It's a white economy, okay? To the extent that the majorities of people do not have access to fresh water, yes? It's not just because it's got white people in it. The structure is intended to make sure the inequalities in South Africa are much more skewed on racially, yes? In our country, even when white people have disappeared, that structure has remained. We haven't done enough to disrupt it. If you like, what triggered off the argument about the land question was precisely it was going to the rearrangement of our economic, regardless of what people might think. Now, there might have been some successes and failures here and there, but that's what it triggered off. So the question has to do with people having a stake in the economic, right? Which is what I meant by the economic form. So by decolonizing, it means you own it. We need to own the resource ourselves, right? We need to decide what the economic is for. We need to decide for ourselves how to get out of this impasse on our terms. Not because somebody else asked us, but because it's part and parcel of the ongoing lexicon of freedom and democracy. That's what I mean by on the sphere of the economic. If we can think about what it meant for our country, independence of our country, then translate that and think about the independence of our economic sphere, right? And control the gears of it in every single form you can. And then create partnerships with whoever while you're in the front line.
Okay.
Instead of them being created by somebody else.
So, from a foreign policy perspective, do you see Africa? You mentioned South Africa, for instance. They've just gone through the elections. Now we've noticed countries like Venezuela, we've noticed countries like Cuba and Brazil look into these questions much more prominently. The question is, in Africa, we don't seem to have that same discussion. We see it in South Africa, but it's mainly played in the theater of, say, its parliamentary politics. But we haven't seen actual action. Now, Zimbabwe cannot act in isolation if this thing is going to be feasible. I'm assuming so. So far we've done well, but we've been punished heavily as a consequence. And that surely has worked as a deterrent to other African countries. Do you see this being translated throughout the continent? And this carrying beyond just a national sentiment, but a continental sentiment that sees Africa as repositioning itself in this new world changing order that seems to be coming towards the global south?
I'm an African, if I say very simply. The fate of Africa is interconnected to me. Doesn't matter where. Okay? Africa and these diasporas are connected to me. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the question about thinking the future of the continent, which is why I say geopolitical institutions matter. We cannot get out of this impasse alone. That's an illusion. And I think it's a mistake for Zimbabweans to think that they can pull out of a hat a solution for ourselves that somehow is going to lead us to
that is independent of SADC. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. You need to create solidarities that allow us to cohabit, to live on the planet with others. Now, and that requires a rethinking from where we are now. And so the fate of Zimbabwe will become the fate of the region, or become the idea that Zimbabwe can arrive at some economic solution that somehow is disconnected from the region is for the birds. So we got to think about how we are interconnected and argue the case of what it means to be decolonial. So we are in that, what I sometimes call Hunde Pfungwa. We need to think differently about what it means to be in the new. Okay.
Right.
So I think, you see, the thing, we've sometimes I say Zimbabweans have been indulging what I call an Oedipal crisis for a long time. Everything is to do with daddy, you know? Mm-hmm. You know, it doesn't rain, it's Robert Mugabe. It rains, it's Robert Mugabe. You know what I mean? It might be. Give that up. We need to think about what kind of world do we want to live in. I would like us to say we want to live in a decolonized world in which we can live with others who are different from us without being the ones who get ridden. Yes? Mm-hmm. I want to live in a world in which that is equal to everyone. I want to be able to be a human being. Okay? Now, you can only be, humanism performatively can only take place when you become human. Now, the independence moment was about becoming human, right? I want us to be economically human.
Actually, this leads me to this might lead me to a question that I had actually. Looking at the current the new surge of the nature of politics that we're seeing within Europe, within Britain in itself, espoused with the notion of Brexit and so forth, where the question of humanism comes into play here, where we see the racial slurs, where we yet again see the story being much more revealed, where the African or the black person is being dehumanized. How interconnected is this to our origin, and how important is it for us for the African diaspora, but particularly the Zimbabwean diaspora, who tends to borrow their political school of thought from what some may term neoliberalism? How then do we read this through this new force line of Brexit?
Let me unpack a number of things that you just said there. I don't mind people borrowing. I borrow from all over the place, provided I know why I'm doing the borrowing in order to get it.
I think that's the emphasis. Provided why you know you're doing the borrowing.
Just a minute. The first thing is this: the struggle to be human is one thing, okay? And in many ways, the history of Black life has been of effect about that question about the struggle to be human. It has not just been about black people, or African people. Yeah. There are whole lots of other people on the planet who too have been struggling around the question about to be human. Yes?
Yeah.
Some of that has been won, but not all of it has been won. Right? So the question about being human still matters a great deal. Okay? Because I remember. I'm old enough to remember. I spent my childhood during the period of the Federation of Religion and Gospel. Remember that outfit? Mm-hmm. So people would say, "How many people are in the car?" They'll say, "Well, and somebody else from Malawi." There's something in that language. Yes?
Yeah.
Humanizes somebody, and dehumanizes another.
Which carries itself in feminism and in other movements.
Hang on a minute. And that kind of linguistic turn tells us about what the struggle to be human, right? So at one point in the struggle for independence, it was a struggle to be human, right? Because we were non-people, we were just garden boys who spoke in Chilapalapa and did not write to anything. Yes, and that was, right? We won that argument, but it's not over yet in the field of the economic. Okay? We're still somebody who are dependents. We depend on somebody else giving you pocket money. Okay? Which is not the same thing as owning the means of production and consumption. And so that's where we are. So it's not going to come from nirvana. We're going to have to do it ourselves. We're going to have to ask ourselves what we want the economic for. And my argument is we have to make the economic decolonial so that we are in control of it, as part and parcel of the planet, as cohabitants of. The ecological disasters that have become a characteristic of the modern planet will be resolved. The solutions to it is on the African continent. Okay? The majority, the population of the world, Africa is the youngest population on the planet. And it has the most space on the planet. It is the planet that is the future, whereas the rest of the world is in crisis. So let's think about it in that kind of modernist way, if you like. Not a Euro-modern, but an Afro-modern, which allows us to think differently, to imagine, the field of inquiry or for study that I'm interested in, visual culture, art histories, and so on. I'm interested in thinking about Africa becoming the center of art histories. So instead of one that simply is used as kind of like, Oriental way of telling someone else's story. That's turning it on its head. Okay? I'm interested in, some people argue about whether or not we should return objects that were stolen on the African continent as a question of injustice, which I agree. But at the same time, I would like to see those objects that remain to be premised, a signpost to be written on them and says, these Elgin marbles were stolen from Greece. There was a series of crimes. So that this memory of the crime of colonialism, it does not disappear. Okay? So it depends what site everybody occupied. There are some things that I know how to do. There are some things that I don't know what to do. But I think what I'm driven by...
you as an individual are different. And then some in your academic centers may be driven by by talking about what our GDP was pre-coloniality, and so we occupy different spaces in intellectual.
We need in some ways to give up thinking. We need to give up thinking that our current thinking. We need to think about the ideas that we use. Well, we need to pay focus on the ideas that we use to focus on our world. Okay, the Anglo-American intellectual archive is come to a dead end. We have to start somewhere else.
Right.
Okay, so I don't mean you stop reading Heidegger, yes? I'm saying if you want to understand how fascism works, read Heidegger, right? So you turn it on its head.
Yes,
okay?
yeah.
So we need to think about how do we understand our worlds? Who are our intellectual ancestors that are enable us to navigate the morass we are now in? Now, I'm not convinced that the Euro-American University and its ecosystem is going to produce the tools that's going to get the majorities of the world out of this impasse. It simply isn't going to happen. So it's going to come about from a slightly different orientation. And I really would like us to start on the continent to think about the ideas that we imagine ourselves in the world. I'm not going to a sort of local, back to some older place. No, I want us to be in the modern globally, but from a position that is different from the one that we are now in. So we are able to imagine the world differently.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you, because I've been recently studying a gentleman by the name Parag Khanna, who writes on his recent book is The Future is Asian, something like that, where he argues, as you are arguing, that the intellectual theories used to define Asia do not work in Asian communities, because they fail to take into context the cultural and the non-hegemonic aspect to the traditions within that particular continent, which I think is a position that we should posit for ourselves in Africa, and build our own theories, our own research centers that think from our own, as you call it, Afro-modernity. I think my final question would be, as we look to the future, projections suggest that Africa will have a population of 2.5 billion by 2050. How does a country like Zimbabwe, a landlocked country like Zimbabwe, within the context of the continent, prepare itself for the coming Africa, as you've said, looking at the Afro-modern, beyond what you suggested, of course, the education aspect and so forth? How can we?
I think Africa's biggest gift to the world is what I call movement. Is the sort of movement of history. I become a citizen of the continent, not just a citizen of Zimbabwe. This idea of being landlocked will disappear at some point. I think at the end of borders will be the gift to the world. So instead of thinking about just Zimbabwe, let's just think
from a continental perspective,
in a much bigger sense. Okay, and that's what I mean by there's quite a lot of space on the continent for African people and its diaspora to have fun, and elsewhere. The globe should be open instead of just one space. That's one thing.
Let
me just get back to the question about ideas. I think one of the homework people have to do is just to identify who their intellectual ancestors are. Who do you think with? Not as a kind of Bible, but something that enables you to see that which you didn't see before, okay? Something that speaks to the material conditions that you have lived, or the one that you imagine you have lived. And I think a curriculum that begins by identifying what African people do and live, how we live their day-to-day, is a much better place to begin. So I would like to hear more people talking about, reading Cabral. I would like to hear women just digging out, go to the archives and reading their letters, talk to your grandfather. Let's create new knowledges that allow us to live together if they're not there already. Okay, let's reclaim the sense of Africanity, which is part and parcel of the globe, rather than just being kind of local. Let's stop being this provincial. Let's imagine bigger. You know, the University of Timbuktu is older than the planet. I just trying to imagine a graduation day of the University of Timbuktu, people throwing hats before the idea of university was gone somewhere else. So I'm not suggesting build more universities. Actually, I think neoliberalism has crushed universities worldwide, and the ecosystems of learning has moved outside universities. You know, there are different kinds of places. So, but we need to think in a much more expanded notion of what thinking and production of really useful knowledge could look like. That enhances our freedom and lexicon. And I'm afraid Zimbabweans, we need to rise up a bit more and move beyond. Of course, it matters to be connected to political institutions and so on. Then we need to go beyond that. We need to go beyond that and think about how to find or create the tools that enable us to stop killing one another. You know?
Yeah.
No, you know, that's a very, very important thing to be able. If you cannot identify that the sacredness of somebody who's different from yourself, then you obviously don't think of yourself as sacred at all. You have to recognize the other much more than we do. And in that sense, a notion of cohabitation becomes concrete. And that goes beyond what political party you belong to. You know, I come to these ideas as if I was a jazz player, which I am. And for me, it's like the note in the tune, you know, the central point of the tone. The performance is something else, but the tone has to be about how do we extend the lexicon of freedom and liberation. And those two things can only be enhanced by a sense of extending where we left off with the independence into decoloniality. Now, you can see two political traditions emerging. There's a neoliberal story, you know, the workerist, we've got our own homegrown in Zimbabwe, if you like, or continuing and renewing the liberation story in a deep sense to the sites that we didn't think before. And one has to imagine then, where then do you take where the old people left off? What happens after that is gone? That is a better way of restoring the Oedipal crisis, which does not just think everything is to do with Blue Reef. It isn't. The future has to do with Honde Mfungwa in a very serious sense.
Right. Well, okay, so I'll to those who are just tuning in, this is a Youth League forum created as to, you know, to explore different ideas, explore different thoughts. We would like to encourage a sense of political tolerance. We want to speak to people we differ with. We want to speak to people we agree with, but with the underlying philosophy that we want to build Zimbabwe, we want to build Africa, we want to build a sense of political tolerance. Now, Professor George Shire, my final question to you would be: what would be your parting sentiments to those who are within the UK, within the diaspora at large, who are seeing the many changes happening within Europe and seeing the many changes in the young democracy that is Zimbabwe? How best can we participate, even though we are not local in the geographical sense?
I urge Zimbabweans not to see themselves as if they were at a bus stop waiting for a bus to arrive. You know, you need to identify. If you live in Zimbabwe, Britain, you pay your taxes here. Okay, and one way of thinking about that is to imagine, well, how might you influence opinion in Britain so that it has a positive aspect of what's going on in Zimbabwe. Okay, so you know, you're not perennially waiting. You know, we need to be engaged wherever we are. Okay, that's how interconnected one becomes. This idea that you can live in Britain for 15 years and then doing nothing, whatever nothing might means, and then go to Zimbabwe and run a country is for the birds. Doesn't occur that way. You have to put your feet, engage wherever you are. That's what I understand political involvement to be. Right. There are other African communities. There are other diasporan communities. There are people whom we have shared interests. We create solidarities in and through political questions and so on. Think about what is going on, say, in refugee detention centers in Britain. And think about how it affects the number of asylum seekers and so on. And how it also affects Zimbabweans over here. That's one way in which you create solidarities. Think about the numbers of young men particularly, who are finding themselves at the receiving end of the criminal justice system. I know of a number of young Zimbabweans who are languishing in Zimbabwean prisons. How much work are we doing around that?
Yes.
The number of levels of questions about domestic violence that I keep on hearing every now and again. How much of that? There's a hell of a lot of work as Zimbabweans we should be doing wherever we live that enable us to connect with what's going on in Zimbabwe and the globe. So it's not disconnected. So the idea that I can say something about Zimbabwe and Zimbabwe alone and remain silent
about the issues
what's happening in my yard where I live is for the birds. The world is far more interconnected now. Let me just give you one good example of what's good that's going on.
Okay.
If you look at what's going on the visual arts, yes, and Zimbabwean artists have been stellar, you know. They have resisted producing the kind of work that NGOs or foreign donors ask them to do. They've resisted producing kind of party political material, but they have produced some of the most radical material on the visual arts that you can see. That in every single international visual arts arena that I go to, Zimbabwe stands firm. So that there is a hope if you go to the site of culture about what is going on and a kind of creativity, okay, of the cultural scene. Now, by the culture, I don't mean tradition. I mean the everyday. You know, the ensemble of the everyday. So that gives me a sense that the site of culture might give us a sense of speaking about Zimbabwe with our heads high. So people can walk tall. You know, there's always another way of doing the political.
Sorry, you just pressed into something I'm equally...
with the political party. Now, as Zimbabweans, we start off our conversations, hello, how are you? Makabi, you don't start off by scolding people, you know. And I think the best thing we should have, is actually sometimes it's okay to disagree. You know, it really is quite healthy to disagree, and it's out of a disagreement that we end up finding something that works. I don't want to talk to people who agree with me all the time. Can you imagine? The most boring thing on the planet. But it starts from the kind of what I call mutuality, convivially wanting to live in the same space together. So we can do it.
Yeah. So I know I had said my last question, but quickly, you touch on a subject that I'm quite passionate about. And what do you think the role of art with the diasporan art and those in Zimbabwe as art, what has it been in terms of, preserving the notion of culture or redefining the notion of culture when it comes to understanding the Zimbabwean story?
I said two things about that. I think that two things about that. One of the things I suggest to young people, go and read Amilcar Cabral on the question of culture. Yeah? The site of culture matters a great deal. In fact, nothing takes place outside of culture, right? And in which a number of art forms are. Yeah? It does not give you guarantees, though, but nevertheless, everything takes place there. So we should pay attention to the site of culture, because it's where everything takes place. Nothing takes place outside the ensemble of the everyday. Okay? Keywords. The ensemble of the everyday. So culture matters.
Okay.
Right. And with that eye, if you look again, there are multiple examples one could give you to which Zimbabwe just shoots into the stellar stars. So if only we could think with it, right, to figure out where to go next. I think this idea that everything can be found on Google is a nightmare. We need to understand the histories that have got us to where we are. How did we get here? Right? How come we've forgotten who we are? Part of the reason we've forgotten who we are, we're too busy listening to somebody else telling us
who we are. Yeah.
Instead of us finding out and making sense of who we are wherever we are on the planet. Okay? So there is not a notion of a return to a pure place. It's a question of how to be in the modern world wherever you are, with the brand, with the badge, with the signature that says, my name is Farai Mfuti. Yes, there is something about the name you carry. It says something about who you are. Now, I don't often describe, the way I know diaspora is the word a lot of people use these days, I'm not Woody Allen. I'm a Zimbabwean who lives somewhere else. I understand what it means. By being diasporian means there is no return. We tricky that word is. We do live in a diasporic world, but that doesn't make you diasporian, okay? And we need to think about what that means for the time being, so that we can be clear about which issues are we dealing with. I mean, the cue to the word diasporian allows us to be planetary. It makes us get into the world. Now, getting into the world, you have to be careful what you mean by getting into the world. Getting into the world is not the same thing as living in London, you know? It means being much bigger than that. So it's not about where geographically you are, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you can be as in Bare for the rest of your life, but be in the West in your head. So we need to think about these questions before we just inhabit someone's description of who we are.
Okay.
That again is another aspect of what I call on football.
Okay, so what I'm going to quickly do is, before you go, I'm going to quickly see if anyone wants to send a question out. If anyone has a question for Prof before he leaves, please do send out a question so we can quickly get that answered for you. Walden, thank you for tuning in. Charlene, thank you for tuning in. Rufaro Koseke, how are you doing? Mary Ann Kirk, thank you for tuning in. Chido, as I said before, thank you for tuning in. Now, folks, if there is no one with a question, then we will be closing this meeting. Like I said before, this is a platform that we have created as a political party, yes, as a youth league, yes, but it is really to break down the barrier that is constructed, that restricts us from having a conversation. We are people who stem from a joint philosophy of Ubuntu. So we are trying to encourage that by reaching out, by listening more, and by understanding the histories that create us, that bring us to where we are today. It was my pleasure to speak to Professor George Shire, and I thank you for your time, and I thank you for this opportunity that you've given the Youth League to be able to speak to you with regards to the questions that we had in relation to geopolitics. If you have any parting words, sir.
My parting words?
Yes, sir.
Somebody bring me some more soon.
I'm sure that can be arranged. We actually have one of our corners on the ground.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you so much, sir. Have a good day.
Yeah.
Bye. Good night, sir. And guys, sorry yet again for the technical difficulties we had. We were trying to get the good prof connected, but we had a few challenges in that regard, so we had to quickly do what we had to do to ensure that the interview happened. But this is, yet again, allow me to appreciate you all for tuning in tonight. My name is Farai Movuti, and as I said before, I'm the Youth League chairman of ZANU-PF UK Youth League. If you have any questions, you want to get in touch, please do send us a message, and one of our guys in the team or me directly, I'll get in touch. And if you're looking to join the party, please do feel free. Until we meet again on our next conversation with another political player and an educationist or whoever we deem fit to discuss the burning issues of the day, we will definitely connect with you then. Peace and love. Take care.